All right, there we go. Hopefully you have less hiccups this time around. But everybody can see my screen, right? We're good there? Yeah, Jonathan? Okay, perfect. So, there's no file for this part. I'm just kind of roughly going to go over UV unwrapping for you guys. It's going to be pretty simple, hopefully, because I know this is like a really tricky topic. It's kind of hard to visualize this. This isn't really an artsy thing. This is a super technical thing. Yeah, I was in the lecture with Gavin, so I saw where the struggles were. So I'm going to try and address as many of them as I can today, so that you guys can get into texturing a bit later, and then dive a bit more in depth into a few things Gavin said. So to start with, I just have some basic objects here. I made this one to sort of represent the handle of a sword, so I'll show you that, guys, later, since I know Gavin used the sword as the example. But basically, these shapes here are all the primitives that you would ever really use for modeling, right? Lecture be posted on Canvas. I have to ask Gavin about that because I think he just forgot, because my lecture for my modeling 2 class, also he didn't upload it, so I think he just has them on his computer. He kind of forgot. He might be rewatching them, I'm not sure. And last week's lab did get uploaded. Jonathan, there's a link. It was in the Discord. I'll put them all on Canvas once I get access. That'll be really soon because they finally got the TA contracts out. So soon there will be Canvas, and I'll be able to give you guys links to everything. Yeah, so JJ's got it there. So these 3 shapes, the sphere, cylinder, and the cube, or I mean this is also a rectangle, however you want to see it, you can use these for any object, right? So that's a simple way of doing things. I submit that guy. The simple way of doing things is to block everything out with basic shapes. If I wanted a sword handle here, it would just be, I mean, this is basically how I made my sword handle. Same idea, right? And so you can apply these same UV unwrapping techniques for the basic primitives to the more advanced shapes. So that's kind of how we want to do it, because if we can think of everything as these simple shapes, it's a lot easier to unwrap. And I'll show you the basics for unwrapping simple shapes. So we'll start with the cube, because it's probably the easiest. In like grade school, you must have probably done some kind of like folding boxes, right? Like they make you cut out like a T shape and then fold it up. And it's the exact same idea here. Yeah. So a lot of people have already seen what a cube looks like unwrapped. If I get rid of this, it's just easier to see. Nope, that's not it. There we go. Everybody kind of knows how this becomes the cube, right? So as far as unwrapping goes, what you want to think about is just these edges on the outside. You need to mark seams for all of those edges to get this shape. So if I just get rid of all of these and unwrap it, these basic shapes, all 3 of these, have default unwraps. So even though I don't have any seams here, it's still got an unwrap, because by default they're so simple that Blender just has them programmed in to unwrap in a certain way, because that's the way that they're supposed to be unwrapped. If I add random seams that don't make any sense, or just mark everything, then it will change. Right? But we want to kind of try to visualize that shape, that T shape, onto the cube. So if I go into face mode here, and I kind of start selecting, if I have a T, I have, these 3 faces that are all going to be in a line, and then these faces would be in another line, because we have the T going up and to the side. So I want seams around these 3 faces here. So I can go into edit mode and just select the perimeter. I don't want these edges on the inside, because if you UV unwrap everything, show how to do the unwrap? Yeah, I'll do that in a sec. if you UV unwrap everything, or sorry, mark seams for everything, then every face is going to be its own island. And while that can work sometimes, it leads into some problems later, and I'll show you those problems on this handle here. So let's mark these seams with Control E. Oh, sorry, I just realized this isn't working. There we go. So we can mark these seams that we have selected on this cube with Control E, and it's mark seam, or just M. And you can see we have those seams selected. And this is also like a super iterative process. So I can just unwrap this now and see where I'm at. So that's what I've got. And it's not what I want. You can see I've got these two faces here. Two islands, sorry, because I've got a seam that runs all the way around. So these three faces have become one island, and these three have become the other island. To get that T shape, I need to connect one of these. So let's pick, I don't know. Let's pick this edge and just clear the seam. So Control E, bring up the menu again, clear seam. Yeah, a little bit tricky with one monitor. It'll be a bit trickier later when we get to the actual activity, but for now, if you just watch, it should be fine. So now I've removed this one edge, and now these faces, all of these faces, because there's no seams in between them, have become one island over here. Oh, there we go. So now this is one island. And this works, so you can unwrap it just like this. It's still, you know, your T shape. But, you know, maybe you really, for some reason, just want it to look like you want this face to be connected. You don't want a seam here, because you have a pattern here. And you don't want the seam to, like, break the pattern. Because everywhere you have a seam, your texture is going to shift a little bit. And so it might, you know, break an illusion on the texture. If you draw a straight line, it might not come out straight once it crosses. So I can try just clearing it there and moving it down here on the bottom, because let's say this is a box like this on the ground, you're not going to see the seam on the bottom, so I'd rather have my seam down here. So let's move it, unwrap it with U, and now I have, you know, that default square shape. Right. So that's the cube, pretty simple for the most part. You just want to think about where you have your breaks and where you have connected faces. So these, if I turn, there's a sync button, actually. I don't know if Gavin went over this, I don't think he did. But in the top left of the UV window, there's a little double arrow going two directions, and that's sync selection. So if I pick edges here now, they'll be selected on my mesh. So these edges here don't have seams, you can tell because they're connected on the UVs. And you can see it's the same up here. No seams, they're connected, and my textures will fly across. Not fly across, but they'll map properly without any breaks or lines. Right? And if I go into material, you can see that's how it is. So along these two faces, there's nothing, but then here you have a bit of a seam, so the texture doesn't line up perfectly, because that's where the cut is. Yeah, it is really useful for figuring out where you are in the mesh. So you can see here that there's a seam, and it doesn't look right. So that's why I put this seam down here at the bottom. It's not going to line up 100%, so that way it's hidden, and my texture stays as clean as possible. And I'll get more into like the placement and everything later with this one. But for now, I'll move on to the cylinder. So the cylinder is actually really easy. You just think about it as a top, a bottom, and then this row of faces, you want it to be as flat as possible, so you want it to look like just a row of faces. And because it's already set up this way, all you need to do is add a single cut. You've got the cuts all the way around the top, all the way around the bottom, and then from here onward is your row of faces. and it's going to have the same problem where it's not lined up here. It is in this case just because this is taking up all the UV space, but if I just shrink it down, you'll see it's not. There. So this is like sword handle, for example, like I'll go over here. It's really hard to get it to wrap all the way around because of the seam that you have there. But there's a trick. Well, it's not really a trick. It's just hiding it, but we'll get into that after. And then, yeah, your top and your bottom face, they're fine because their textures can cross here. Generally, at the end of a cylinder, you'll have a different material, which is also where you want your seams, but again, I'll get into that later. Spheres, the final one, it's kind of the same as a cylinder. The default sphere doesn't actually unwrap quite like this. If I clear these, whoop. Just add another sphere. This one's not working. If I add a sphere, by default, it's unwrapped as like this. It's the same kind of idea. It's just curved here. You don't want it to be curved. You want it to be flat. So these cuts. Whoop. If I find this one on the mesh here. So it's cut all these because if you don't have them cut, it's going to try and bend them together and you're going to get stretching. So if I were to draw on this, because it's not a flat surface, right, it's going to deform my texture. The colors are a default material. If you hit new over here on the window, hit OK, you can go to image and you can choose blank or UV grid or color grid. So here I'm just using a color grid to showcase these examples. All right. So that's these three primitives down. And once we have that down, we can kind of use that for everything. So here, like I said, I've got, essentially, if I look at it and break it down, I've got a cube, I've got a cylinder, and I've got a sphere-ish looking thing. So if I were to unwrap this, I'll get rid of this so you can see the unwrap. I just unwrap this really quickly, and you can see I've kind of got these same shapes. So there's this big flat piece that I was talking about from the cylinders. If you look over here, it's selected the cylinder part. Here's the sphere. Here's the bottom of the cylinder, which extends to the bottom of the sphere. And here is the cube parts. And when I'm unwrapping these, I'm thinking about them as if they're just, you know, I focus on one part at a time. If you really want, you can even like hide the other part and just look at this part and focus on it like that. Right? And if I go to material preview, it looks okay. Now you notice that there's a really bad seam here and here. So here, hello? That's not working. Here and here. And the reason that these seams are super okay is because if you think about this from a material standpoint, this part of the sword handle and this part of the sword handle are going to be different materials. So you're never going to see that seam because it's going to go from, let's say, like a hand wrap kind of material here, like a leathery hand wrap, to a steel material here. So if the cutoff is super sharp, it doesn't matter because it's a, you know, it's a different material. The cutoff's always going to be sharp. You don't need it to transfer over. In the case of wrapping around the handle, though, let's say this is all one leather texture, you don't want this seam here. This looks really bad. But it's kind of unavoidable because you need at least one cut somewhere on this cylinder to make it flat, like this. And honestly, the biggest tip I can give you for that is just hide it. So this is my rig from last year for our game, but I've just thrown the sword handle in here. And the seam is just at the bottom. And that's just the easy way to hide it, and this is how it's done 90% of the time. Because in any animations where it's being held, for example, like you'll never be able to see this side of the sword. Or if it's a multiplayer game, whoever's on this side of the sword will barely be able to tell. So it looks much better. So that's a little bit about, when and where to use seams and how to use seams. And like I said, these all have base unwraps, so if you're like really kind of stuck, just spawn in default cube, hit U, open the UV map, and you just try and work it backwards. So work on placing the seams until you get that shape. That's a really easier exercise to sort of understand how to flatten the faces better. And then you know, once you have them all working in their own right, then you can sort of work on the parts that are combined. So like these bits here, where it connects into the circular face, like I can do that after, once I have this box unwrapped properly and this cylinder unwrapped properly. So that's just about it for this part. Not a whole lot to it, I know, but just wanted to give you guys a bit more of an understanding. And then I'm gonna put this file up. What would you guys prefer, if I just slap the file in Discord or put up a link to a Google Drive in the chat? Discord? Link. Okay. To Google Drive. Well, let's see. I think theoretically the Discord links, like you can just kind of like download. Why not both? Yeah, I guess I could just do both. Let's this. And I'll close these. So that's up on Discord for you guys to download. Yeah, it's a really small file. It's not actually a quiz. This is actually from my year, last year. But it's a really good exercise, and instead of assigning it to you as a quiz, I'm going to walk you through it. So it's going to be a little quick, well, it might not be quick, but it's going to be a tutorial on how to walk through an object like this. It's a bit more complicated. So do people still need the Google Drive link? All right. Bear with me for just a second. Where did it go? Yeah, I just uploaded it to my Google Drive and it just disappeared. There we go. And there's a link. So I'll give you guys a little bit to download that before we get started with the next part. This is going to be the longer part. And I'll mention now, it's not for marks or anything, so don't worry about it if you can't figure it out during the lab time. It's just a follow along, pretty much. Did I miss 3 quizzes? No, sorry, I forgot to rename the file. I'm not giving out any quizzes for our labs. just the occasional in-class activities, which this isn't even that. This is just kind of like a follow-along for the tutorial. You guys don't have to submit this or anything. Like I said, it's just here for your reference. So I left the completed hammer in as well, so you can reference it whenever. If I go over here to UV, then like the texture's already there for you and everything. Right, so nice. Jeff. How do we view the UV again? So at the top here, there's a bunch of different layouts. I don't know how easy it is to see my mouse cursor, but there's a bunch of different layouts up here. And one of them says UV editing. So you can just click on that one, it'll bring it up. Alternatively, if you come down to the bottom left corner or top right corner of any window, well actually any corner, but in this case the bottom left or bottom right, it'll bring up this little crosshair, so your cursor will turn into a crosshair. And that means you can split the view. So I can drag it on your window, and then I can come up here to the editor type, and I can bring it to UV. Or hit Shift F10. I hadn't really thought about that. I was going to walk you through it so that we could keep up with questions and everything, but if you try and solo it right now, go for it. But there's already a texture in place, so all you have to do, well, I say all you have to do, is just unwrap this model and make it fit to the texture. Just put the screen, so in the bottom left of every window, or the bottom right, depends what side you want the screen to come out on. If you put your crosshair right there, it'll turn into a crosshair, your cursor will turn into a crosshair. And that means you can drag a window. And to get rid of it, you take the bottom left of the window you don't want, or of the window you want, and you can drag it over top. You drag it over top of the window you want it to overtake, and it'll get rid of it. So you can clean up like that. Personally, I just use these ones up here 90% of the time because they're generally pretty good. The animation one lacks a bit, but for all the rest of them, they are pretty good. Yes, so Jonathan, you made a bunch of windows, and the only caveat with this system is, as far as I know, you have to manually close every window. You could just switch layouts, because if you switch layouts, it gets rid of it. So just switch to like scripting, or I don't know, just switch to UV editing or something. And then you only have two windows, and you just close one, because it saves per window. So you can even make a custom layout. So if I duplicate this one, and I really want it to look like, I don't know, this for some reason, and put the, I don't know, shader editor over here. If I really wanted my window to look like this, I could just leave this as a tab here. It saves to the file. It won't save to all of Blender, but it'll save to the file. And then if I switch back to it, it'll still be there, just how I want it. To delete the extra windows, the same way you added it, just the other way. Instead of dragging into the window, drag out of the window. And you can delete these as well. So, do you guys want to sort of walk through this together, or do you guys want to take a crack at this first on your own and see what you guys come up with? Walk through it? what are you doing? You're gonna try and UV unwrap this model to make it look like this model. Walk through? Okay. Sounds good. Color on the second hammer. It has a material on it already. But I unwrapped it. So I've already put the material on it for you guys. All you have to do is unwrap it. Yeah, you can just totally watch as well. The following along is just to sort of help you guys put it in your brain, you know? It's like writing down notes instead of just listening. That's all. Unwrapping, hit U. So edit mode, select everything, and hit U. It's gonna look like this. It's gonna look really, really weird because it's just overlaying the texture on everything, which is not what we want. Yeah, no worries, Jeff. It's not for marks or anything, so. If you did just want to watch along, that's fine. And you can always watch along with the video afterwards. So if you, because I'll put it on YouTube, and then if you want, you can watch it back in real time, or not in real time. So to start us off, I think we can get to start us off, yeah? The bar at the bottom, same thing. This is just another window. Actually, all of these are just windows, including this one up here. It's just another editor, so I could have a viewport in here. It just so happens that by default it's always set to the outliner. Even this one is just another window. Could be a timeline, could be a viewport. The bar at the bottom is called the timeline. So if you really want this bar here, you just drag out from the bottom, grab the corner, and just set it to timeline. Unwrapping it won't get anything to display on it. Are you... Let's just pull this over. Do you have this in your UVs? And yeah, are you in material preview mode? Yeah, you gotta be in material preview mode as well. So, Z, material preview. Yep, no problem. So let's get started. Normally, you aren't given a texture before you start unwrapping something, right? Is it supposed to look like a pentagon? Yeah, it's really like there's no edges here. We haven't marked any of our seams, right? So this one's already marked with all the seams that we're gonna go over, and then I'm just gonna go over how we get them there, why they're there, you know, the process. But it's always gonna look really weird if you don't have seams and you unwrap it. It should already load, and then the only thing you should have to do, because I've already added the material, is just go to material preview mode. So Z, down. Jonathan, you're dragging the wrong way. Jonathan in Discord, not Jonathan J. Don't know what button was pressed. Pressed for what? For view mode. Oh, Z. Yeah. If you hit Z, it brings up a radio menu, and you can just kind of move around it. All right. So, Like I said, normally we aren't given a texture to work with, but because this time we are, we kind of use it to cheat a little bit. So we know that this is what the model's supposed to look like. Display on the grid. Oh, the image. If you go to the top here, the top of the image editor, there's a little window and you can choose what texture is loaded in. So yeah, select only the right one. Go into object mode. Yeah, Jonathan, this one's already, I UV unwrapped this one already. So now we're just gonna, this one's not. But if you want to select this one in object mode and not select that one, and then only it'll show up. All right. So since we have this reference, we can go off of a few things to make our lives a little bit easier, and it'll help with sort of isolating those basic shapes I was talking about earlier. So the first and easiest thing we can do is we can look at this shape here, and it's a square. That's all there is to it, it's just a square. And we can see on our texture here that the texture space it's taking up is also just a square. So if we come over here to our mesh, it's kind of hard to see with this on, so I'm going to turn it off actually. And just turn this down. We have our square here, you can see. And we don't want any of this to rip. Like we want this to be seamless as far as the face of the texture is concerned. So we don't want any seams to be going on any of these faces. What we do want is seams around the outside. So I can come over here, and I can select all my faces around the outside. Hit Control E and mark them as seams. And the other way of thinking about this is to pretend that by doing this, I've taken this bit of the model and just separated them. And now I have this piece here, right? And this is what's being unwrapped. But everywhere I have this red line, it's being separated. You guys don't have to do this, I'm just showing it for example. You want it to be attached, but think about the red lines like that. Now if I UV unwrap, hold on. I'm going to UV unwrap just this bit. So UV unwrap will only unwrap what you have selected. So if I only select this bit, and I hit U and unwrap, you can see it gives me this square shape. There is a select seam shortcut, yeah. It's select, and then should be way to. Maybe there isn't. I could have sworn there was. Yeah, maybe not. You can select sharps, but unwrap the part you just showed. I'm not seeing it appear on the grid. Are you in the UV editor or the image editor? Yeah, you can also alt-click the edge there. I just want to select them one by one, but it's faster just alt-click. But Christian, you need to be in the UV editor to see them appear here. Would be able to add seams on each of the corners of the square. So like right here, you could, and that will give you a flatter UV result. For the purposes of this though, if you do that, and I just select this, and wrap it, and move it down here. Although it's not very noticeable, you'll end up with little seams on each of these edges. And maybe you don't want that because this detail is kind of more forefront. But yeah, there's no right or wrong way to UV. Less seams, the better, not necessarily. It's always a balancing act between the number of seams and how flat you actually make your UV. Because you don't want so many seams that the texture breaks everywhere, but at the same time you don't want so few seams that your textures and your UVs stretch. So you just got to find kind of a middle ground. To turn off snap to grid, it's the same. So a lot of the hotkeys in the editor transfer right over for UVs. So if I shift tab, because that's the hotkey for magnet, it changes it, or I can click the button up here. And so for moving around, it's G. For scaling, it's S. Rotating, R. All the usual hotkeys apply over here as well. In UV editor, when I unwrap, they aren't bunched together. Are you unwrapping the already unwrapped hammer? This one's already got all the UVs, so if you unwrap this one, like if I just hit U here, they won't be all bunched together per se, because they're all separate pieces. But here what we can do is select, doing the whole work now, I'm not going to square piece you unwrapped. Do you have it marked out like this? Oh, I mean, yeah, I only had the square selected. So I only selected these parts, and because it only unwraps what I selected, that's why it's this whole thing. And I'll just leave these corner seams in here because it's not the end of the world, and there are multiple ways to UV unwrap. It's just about making it look good. You can do it however you want. So if you hit U unwrap, a whole row with Alt, I'm in face select mode. So Alt click face select. Works for vertex loops, edge loops, and face loops. So. And then for this, I'm using control. I'm holding control down, so control is pick shortest path. So you can sort of just kind of click around, and it will select all the faces that are in between your face and the face you just selected. Alright, so Christian, I'm not exactly sure what's going on there. If you have everything selected and you hit U and you click unwrap, alt click is not selecting a row. It should. This is me alt click. So I'm not quite sure what's going on there. But anyways, I'll just leave it like that for now. And we can move on to the next part. So like I was saying earlier about how you can think about seams for different materials, if we look over here, we've got this piece on top, kind of looks like the top of a chicken head. It's a different material than the rest of the hammer. So it's got this dark material. So this seam right here, it makes sense because it's a different material. And that's a really easy place for us to put a seam. So we can come over here. We can select all of these edges at the bottom here. And we can mark that off as a seam. If we unwrap it, it's going to look close, but it's going to be a little bit wonky still. And you can see it's kind of pulling, and that's called UV stretching. And you can actually look at UV stretching by opening up this panel in the UV editor with N. You can come to View, Overlays, and there's a checkbox that says stretching. So if I hit this, it's going to show me where my mesh is not flat. Move the unwrap, so it's the same command. So G, just like I'm moving parts over here, G works over here. G, G. And you can see it here. The less blue it is, the more stretching is going on. So these parts are pretty flat, but then these parts are really not very flat. And up here, it's super not flat. And we can see that this edge is sort of being tugged. UV is transparent in the editor. Are they white? For selecting the part within the seam, yeah, they're white. So you're unwrapping the entire everything, so it's gonna look like this. If I take this off, it's just gonna be pure white. But the way I avoided that was by, if you know L, L selects linked parts. So, you know, individual pieces. But if you hit L and you come down here to this menu, you can change it by material, seam, sharp, UVs. So here I'm just gonna hit seam, and it'll limit my selection to a seam. I can select just this part, or just this part, or the rest of it. So that's really useful if you want to sort of unwrap something piece by piece. Just select what you want to unwrap and unwrap it, and then you can move it. Yeah, it's super useful. L comes in a lot. It's use it a lot. So if I repeat, it's L to select linked, and normally what it would look like is this, because these are two separate objects, so it'll select this object and this object. But if I limit my selection, so if I hit L and I come down here, there are options. So I can have it on normal, which is selecting the whole object. I can separate it by material. It's not going to do anything because this is all one material. By seam, so these are the seams that I've set up, and I'm just going to select, it's going to stop the seam, stop at the seam. And last one's sharp and UVs. So UVs is going to work the same for if it's already been unwrapped. And then sharp is something else that's like more advanced sub-D kind of modeling stuff, which is not something that you guys will probably be using this year. So don't worry about that one. But the big ones for you guys to know are seam and normal. Those are the two that come in play all the time. So I can L and wrap it. Select this island and scale it into place. And now a nice feature for Blender UVing is I can see that it's kind of stretching here, especially up here. But maybe I don't know where that is on this mesh, because this doesn't look anything like it. It's hard to tell. You could guess, but it's a lot easier to just pick it over here. So that's where this sync function I was talking about earlier comes in handy. I can click this. Oh boy, it's a bit of a mess at the moment. Ooh. I'm just gonna hide everything else. And then I can come over here and I can see that this edge is pulling it into here. And I can mark the seam directly from the editor. So I can mark a seam there. I can mark a seam here, here, and here. And you can see it's marked them on my mesh as well. So I didn't know where these were. I didn't come in and do them. Just by edit marking them here, it's applied them, and then by unwrapping again, it's going to unwrap with these new marked seams. And then I've got my shape. All right. Like I said, you're going to end up with marks here, so you have to kind of have to do a balancing act. If I decide that I really don't like the way that this looks, then I might try removing them. So removing these four. And unwrapping it again. And bringing it down. And now, those seams are gone. Maybe my texture is not exactly where I want it, but those seams are gone at the very least. You can kind of play around with it. I'm kind of just going to leave it like that. And move on from there. So that's an example case of switching materials and using that to switch seams. That's a really good way to do it, because then you don't have to worry about hiding it. It kind of hides itself. Bring everything else back. Turn off the sync. And then now we can move on to this next part. So we have this hammer head. And actually, let's get rid of this first. So it's the exact same thing as this side. I'm just going to go into edge select this edge around the outside. Control E, mark seam. And there we go. Get rid of that. Mark seams in the UV editor, exact same way. Select the edge and then Control E. All of the, like I think Gavin called it contextual, all the commands are contextual. So G over here does one thing, G over here will try and do the same thing, right? To sync the two windows, it's in the top left here. So UV sync selection, if I hover over that. It's a small little button, it's right beside the selection modes. And you'll notice that everything comes up even if I don't have anything selected here, and then if I do select something, it'll also select it on the mesh. There's no stretching. So that comes in handy. So transforming the UV wrap, it was all the same stuff. Like I used S to scale it, I used G to move it, and just put it in place. So if I go back, now I just want to focus on this part. So I have my L selection here, I'm using the seam select. I can hit Control I to invert it. Control I will, it's the opposite of whatever you have selected. So it's the inversion, invert select. So I can hit Control I and then hide, H. And now I just have this, and I can work with just this for my UVs, which makes things a lot easier. So now I can just think of this kind of as a cube, right? Repeat that? Yeah, sure. So I have these seams marked now for these three parts, this one, and this one. And now I want to focus on this big part. And it's kind of tricky when I have to deal with all these other parts that are already unwrapped. So I just want to be able to see this big part. So if I use L select, like the linked select, it's bound to L. I can come down to seam, and that will limit my selection to seams. Get rid of everything else. Or an easier way is select the part I want to work on, and then hit Control I. This keeps turning itself off. I don't know why, but Control I. And then H to hide it. And I can work with just my box. So Taylor, that means somewhere your seams aren't going all the way around. So you might be missing like a single seam somewhere. If I unhide that stuff, if I hit it now, oops, it'll select everything just because it's not entirely cut off. So once it's entirely cut off, it shouldn't do that. Alright, so a few things in Discord I'll just look at quick. Oh, this is a while behind. Aaron, yeah, you said this is a 246, but yeah, that is exactly what's supposed to happen. That was right. Jaden, yours is off, or sorry, not Jaden, Ryan. Ryan, yours is off a little bit here. I'm not sure what you've marked. You've marked along a different edge. To keep it simple, I literally just marked this bottom edge here, so I just separated it sort of into two pieces. This piece and this piece. The seam is all the way through though. It shouldn't be doing that then, that's kind of weird. You can try merging all the vertices again, like hit M by distance, because you might have accidentally duplicated some. Or just try doing this again, just move them around. Sort of go back to normal and then come back to seam. Okay, yeah, I see it in the Discord. Try merging then. Yeah, there must have been an extra vertice or something. So, let's move on to this part. I know that I want this to be a different material than the rest of the hammer. So I'm just going to section it off. So edge select, I'm going to select around this edge, make sure it's got everything. And Control E, mark seam. I can unwrap it. You unwrap. Oh, it's not liking that. There we go. And now I've got this bottom part separated from the rest of it. I can go ahead and hide it for now. Whoops. L, seam, H. It's kind of weird, not sure why it's saying that. Guess we'll just leave it. Go back into edge select mode. And now I'm going to try and think about this as a box. This isn't the best example here. Exactly. I've got this part as a hole. You can see the hole at the bottom here. So we're going to have to work around it. Somewhere, of course, we have to cut all the way around this object. So we'll just pick like here. And there's no particular reason why I picked there. It just, you know, it'd be one of this one or this one. Hide with H. I hide it with H. But yeah, I'm gonna leave this bottom part here because we're gonna connect these edges to it anyway. Let's mark this as a seam and just see what happens now if I unwrap this part. So if you look at these islands, we're getting closer to what we want. shape-wise. If I rotate this, it's kind of got that shape. But if I turn on the overlays, you can see it's stretching on these corners. And I'm going to do the exact same thing I did last time. I'm going to select the edges that are stretching. Control E, mark seam. And if I unwrap it again, you can see it stopped stretching. Got it, Taylor? Alright, cool. Yeah, so by marking those seams in here that were stretching, you can see that they've stopped stretching. And this is really flat, so I can use this for my UV. None of the stretching stuff. But then I can come over here and do the same thing. So these edges are stretching. I'm going to mark this one, and this one. Select everything and hit U in this window, and it'll unwrap it. And now I have my shapes. To check if it's stretching, your window might look like this. So N brings up this window. And then from there you can go to display in view. So view, display, overlays, stretching. Because this was done the way it was for me last year, like this way works no problem. Personally, I would use that method I talked about earlier with the cube, so I'd have this unfold into a T shape. The reason it's done like this is to save on texture space. So I don't know how far along you guys are in graphics, but you're going to be mapping textures using UVs to your meshes, and they take up a lot of storage space for the game, like textures. Especially if you're like a AAA game and you've got all these giant 4K textures, you want to try and maximize the space you can get out of them. So that's why it's done like this. Because if I had a big T here somewhere, it would be impossible to fit everything else into. Right? So that's why it's done this way. So there's no right, wrong way 100% to UV unwrap things. It's kind of up to you. You just the textures I baked into the blend file, so they're already in the blend file. They're not separate. Yep. So yeah, that's why you kind of just have to play around with it, you know. It just kind of, you just have to make it work. It's going to work a little bit different for everybody. It's going to work a little bit different for every model. But if you think about those basic shapes while you do it, it'll just make it a little bit easier figuring out how it's going to work. So let's bring everything back now by hitting Alt-H. And you can see there's still one mesh that's kind of covering everything. So that's one of these two down here, or both of them actually. So I'm going to select this part because I want to unwrap this now. Actually, if everybody can look in the Discord really quick. Yeah, Jonathan. So it is good, but that's exactly what I mean by why it's been split up. Because, well, that's like the general T way to do it. It takes up so much of your space. So that's why we've got it split down the middle, so we can shrink them and put them in the corner. Yeah, so Jonathan, I would just add this seam, this one here, that goes all the way around. Well, almost all the way, it stops at this part. For the two sections of the hammer, yeah, it's this bottom one. If I didn't have this bottom one, I'd just get rid of it real quick. I get something like this. Yeah, so it's not a duplicate, it's just I added an edger on the bottom to separate the two halves. So this one right here. So you can see that if I hit L now, it's cut off by this seam on the bottom and this seam on the top. So it's its own thing. So yeah, now this part, L this part, right now they're 1. If I hit unwrap, they're 2, because of this seam. So I hope that clears that up. And then for now, we'll move on to the handle. So I'm going to do the same thing here. Seam around the whole shape. Yeah, so it's attached to the seam for this part. This seam along here. Separate this piece. Comes down around here. And then it runs into this seam here, which has been here to separate this piece. So it's not one seam continuously running around the whole shape. Like, it doesn't go over this part here. Because that's a separate piece. I just need to make sure that somewhere the seams have sort of locked this shape. And we'll do this again. So L, Control R, H. Yeah, there is technically a seam separating this whole piece from this whole piece, and this whole piece, and this one, and this one, and that one. Viewing the stretch is right here, so view, if you don't see this window, it's N, so N will bring up, I don't even know what this is called, to be honest, N window, that's what I call it, and it's just display, stretching. To unhide, it's Alt-H. Yep, Jonathan's got it. So H is to hide, Alt-H is to unhide. Alright. I'm going to move on to this part now. So this part is, well, let's see. Let's start with getting rid of this. So this is going to be a different material, right? We've got this, this thing here. If I look over at the textured one, it's got like this metal, I guess bloody texture to it. So that's this part here. And since it's a change in material, go figure. Oh, this is just broken now. Okay. Can't see my keys, but I'll just mention them as I go. But we can separate this piece because we know that it's a different material. We can kind of cheat by going over here and taking a look and seeing where we cut it off. But everything that's a different material, we're going to mark off. So I'm going to select all of these edges around the top and mark them. Control E, mark seam. And then I'm going to hit L, so we get this part. And I'm just going to hide it for now so I can work on the rest. The second hammer without the textures is the one that we're unwrapping now. So I just duplicated the hammer and deleted the UVs from it. So now we're working them back in for this part of the lap. So if we look at the top here, this part, it doesn't actually need to exist at all because you never see it. It's going to be inside the bottom of the hammer, right? So we can just delete that face, and that'll make UV unwrapping a little bit easier as well. So this, in essence, it's just a cylinder. So we can use the exact same method as a cylinder. But it's even easier because we don't have a top face, right? I just deleted the top face because it's all the way down here, and it's going to be inside the model anyway. You can't even see it. And the bottom face is taken up by that metal thing. So what we have pretty much is just a cylinder. I selected the handle, just the handle with L. So we can use that same similar technique I was talking about. We want to lay this out as flat as possible. So I'm just going to come in here, and I'm going to start on the outside. You'll see why in a second. I'm going to start here. And I'm just going to Alt-click, and I've selected this entire edge all the way around the mesh. I'm going to deselect a couple of them. Just deselect a couple down here, and come back up here. and just deselect a couple in here. That should be fine. And let's unwrap it and see what happens. So it's busted. We didn't get all the way around it somewhere, probably because of this. Yeah, we've got to at least get to this part. Hold on, where are my edges? Oh, I didn't mark the seams. That is why. Oops. Gotta mark the seams. Let's try that again. So I'm going to find this edge. Alt-click. Yeah, it's going to go all the way around that now. I'm just going to hide this. So I just box selected it and then H to hide. And there we go. So let's mark this as a seam, and now we'll see what happens. We're going to get this shape, because we've got to cut it here, all the way up. So in essence, we have our flat cylinder shape, just like this, basically. We don't have a top, right? So we deleted the top off that, and we don't have a bottom, so we're left with this. And when we come over to this, it's kind of the same thing. It's being pulled in, though, by these edges. If I take a look, it's going to be the edges in here. So that's why I was getting rid of those. So now we can go back and just make adjustments. So, you know, we have our base shape and we know it works. So now we're just going to adjust it a little bit to make it fit the texture better. But you could, like, if you're texturing it after, you could totally just leave it like this and then texture it. The only reason I'm doing this part is because we were given the texture first, and we need to adhere to it. So let's get rid of these. Try again. We got rid of too many, so it's going to start overlapping, so I don't want that. Let's get rid of one to see what happens. No, still too many. Let's try the bottom instead. No, it's not going to work. You want to come in here. Actually, that's probably the easier way to do it. If we come in here and do the same way we did earlier, so like the edge select, so we're just going to take this edge because it's pulling on it, and just mark that. And there we go, we can see it's separated. So same kind of thing, Christian. It's not a double unwrap per se. I've just got edges all the way around it. So these edges are going all the way around it. Part of the UV texture. Yeah, Gary, I guess you might have missed that, but it's L. So if I hit L, there's a menu down here, and I can mark by just the seam. So I can link just the seam that I marked earlier. How did I double unwrap? Yeah, it's like I said, it's not quite a double unwrap. I just got it. I have it linked, or I have it cut the seam all the way down. So when doing that, I've got a big flat. If this is my cylinder, and I've cut a seam at my fingertips, I don't know if you can see this. Then it's gonna flatten out like this. So it looks like it's got this side and this side, but like it's all connected at my palms, so it's all still one mesh. It just looks like two. The only difference is I haven't added that second seam. If I do add that second seam like we did on the hammer, so if I just come down here and select all of these, then it'll just separate them and they'll be two completely separate ones. Which you can also do, but like I said, it brings up that problem earlier where you're going to see the texture split on both sides. It's kind of hard to hide it if it's on both sides. So you want to try and keep cylinders to one seam along the line, along the long part of it anyway. Alright, so we have that shape now. Where the seam cuts for the handle, really just one pretty much. and it's just this big long one all the way up around one edge. And it comes in and meets up with this seam to the same thing, where it separates these two. It doesn't have to be at this edge. It could be coming up here and connect here, or down here, or on the side even. I just chose here just cause. You could choose anywhere. What seams did I get rid of for the cylinder? I didn't actually get rid of any. I left it. Like, you could get rid of these at the very top. It just, I mean, that's me get stretching, because now I've got these ones connected. So it's fine like this. It's easier to have it out. So you get your base shape, like the cylinder, and then you can come into the UV editor and edit them from there. It's easier that way. So I can just keep marking these until I kind of have a separation there, and the same thing down here if I really wanted to. Once you have those like basic shapes, like the cylinder, then it works no problem. Jonathan, not necessarily too many islands, but yeah, like JJ said, there's a lot of unused space, and you want to try and maximize the space. It's kind of like weird Tetris in 2D, but the shapes go everywhere you want, and the shapes are really funny looking. So now, let's unhide everything. Unwrap it. We have a bunch of pieces. You can see we have 2 more pieces left to do here. So if I come down here, it's these 2 pieces. I'm just going to select these and do the same thing. Control I and hide. And I can just focus on just these. So this guy's a bit tricky. It's a more organic shape, and organic shapes are usually hard. Is there a specific reason you want to cram them in so tightly rather than having a higher recent texture? Just because it's mostly just about saving on memory space. Texture memory, you just want it to be as efficient as possible. You generally don't want every object in your game to have a 4K texture. It's just too much. Maybe in AAA, but especially for your own engines, that's not an extra workload that your engine needs to really go through. It's best if you keep it as simple and as optimized as possible. Just a general rule of thumb. How do you know texture needs to be minimalized? What do you mean? Like the UV island? Like when it needs to be shrunken? Yeah, Cotton Modern Warfare is a good example of a game with ridiculously large graphics files. And that's also why the game is so big, all those graphics files. So you don't necessarily know which faces to scale. It's kind of up to you. It depends where you want more detail. So this isn't a great example because you'd probably want more detail on this base of the hammer, since that's like the big part that people are going to look at. So you would just make these parts bigger on your texture, and they'd get more pixels, right? Because this is 2048 by 2048. So the surface area that they take up is the number of pixels you have to work with for that UV island. So something like this handle, where it's just literally 2 colors, it's only here because it fits that space. It really does not need that space. I could shrink it down, put it like right here, give it like 50 pixels, and then make these bigger. But it's just the way it is. It's not entirely optimized. I can show you guys, or probably will show you guys more optimized UVs after this. Hopefully it'll give you a better idea of how to use your texture space. But for now, let's get back to this guy. And how are we going to wrap it? So let's actually just focus on this guy. This one's a bit weird, because if you come over here, you'll see that it's perfectly flat. And it doesn't make any sense. How on earth could this be perfectly flat? It doesn't really match any of the basic primitives. It's kind of a cylinder, but not really. And it's definitely not a square. So we kind of just have to wing it. And sometimes that happens, and it's not the end of the world. So let's try just cutting a loop all the way down the middle. We'll mark it, we'll unwrap it, and we get two shrimp-looking things. And there's a bit of stretching going on, so we can try coming in here maybe and clearing some seams, or marking some seams. But it's kind of just really weird. What we can do is try and just conform them to the texture. So, because it's such a small detail, you don't really have to be worried about people noticing the seams. So we can kind of take like much larger liberties with it. So let's do this. And I'm going to grab this island and shrink it down into the space. I'm going to grab this island and shrink it down into the space. Actually, I'll leave it out here for now. And now I'm going to go into the vertex select mode, and I'm just going to put these where they belong. So if I take all these down, I can flatten them out with scale 0. And I can do the same thing with this side. And this is like, it's far from perfect. But because of how the shape is being used, you can get away with this kind of thing. And there we go. How do you pull the vertices? So I'm just using G and moving them. Like same way you'd move G, use G to move vertices here. I'm just gonna move them over here. And I can use scale on X, or sorry, scale on Y, 0. Over here, and I can scale on X, 0. Scale on X, 0, and scale on Y, 0. If I go to material preview, you notice that it kind of looks fine, even though there's so much stretching. And like I said, it's just because of how small it is, so at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. You kind of just gotta pick your battles. How can you avoid that? You can't. You can and you can't. A lot more time and cleaner geometry. For like this does not have very clean geometry. You've got random edge loops in here that aren't very even. You've got a lot of geometry in here that's kind of non-planar. It's not great. So like the cleaner your mesh is, the easier it's going to be to UV unwrap as well. So that's just another reason to UV unwrap clean. I'm just going to drag this one on top. You guys can drag them out if you want. I'm just going to leave it like that. I think it's fine. If you move vertices on the UV, the other ones move as well. That definitely shouldn't happen. Yeah, have you got sync mode on? I mean, even then it shouldn't. Unless you're hovering over this window. Like I said, or like Gavin said, it's contextual, so whatever window I'm hovering over, that's the one that's gonna, like even if I have both of them selected at the same time like this, whatever window I'm on is the one that's gonna change. Oh, how do you avoid cuts moving together simultaneously? They shouldn't. Like I just said. Unless you mean them moving like this. Oh, I got you. Okay, yeah, turn off sync mode. Yeah, turn off sync mode, like Aiden said. Sorry, misunderstood the question there, but yeah, because what it's doing is it's selecting every vertex if you're on sync mode that's connected in the mesh. So this one's connected to this one, this one, this one, this one. So it'll select all those. To turn off sync, it's this button up here. If it's blue, it's on. If it's not blue, it's off. Now you can sort of move them around. Alright. I'll unhide the rest, and it looks like we just have one piece left. So let's unwrap everything. It's off, but they're still moving together. You might be in edge select mode. It's going to select 2. It's going to select like an edge, and it'll move around like this. But there's all the same modes here, so vertex, and edge, and face. And, or island, if you're moving around the whole thing. So, I'll keep up with that in the chat if it's still not working for you, but for now, move on to the last piece here. So this one again is a little bit tricky, but we can think about it as 2 cylinders. So we can pretend that it's like, there's a cylinder, and there's a cylinder. If we think about it like that, then we can do the same thing. So a cylinder needs that one cut for the top and the bottom, and it needs one for the sides. So for the sides, instead of doing the outside of this cylinder, quote unquote, and this cylinder, quote unquote, I'm going to do the insides of both, because then A, people can't see the seam as easily, and B, because when you mark it, it also links up much nicer. Then we can come around the outside here, and we don't have a top really, but because this piece is acting as sort of the end piece for both, we're going to cut this part out as if it was the top of the cylinder. So mark that part out. Oops. And mark that part out. And now you can kind of see what we have here. So we've kept this part all as one, wrapping around the outside by putting the seam on the inside, so we don't have an ugly seam on the outside here. And the other advantage to that is we keep it as one object, so we can fit it into smaller texture space. So yeah. It's a little bit of a stretch calling this 2 cylinders, but I'm hoping the idea kind of carries over still. As far as just knowing that you need to cut like the top off, the bottom doesn't exist because the top and the bottom are both not here. And then the rest, and you end up with this. Right, so at this point, everyone should have everything unwrapped. And you should have a bunch of shapes like that. Oh, hold on, I'm actually gonna do something different here. I don't want to undo what I did to the little shrimpy thing. Oh, it's too late, isn't it? Oh, that's unfortunate. We'll just have to move it around to later. But now we have everything sort of separated. We have a general idea of what every piece is. And now it's really as easy as just kind of moving them around. So I go into island mode. I'm going to turn off my stretching because I don't need it anymore. I've already unwrapped everything, and now I can see the texture underneath. So I can start taking these, and then one thing I'll say is you never really want to stretch your UVs in one direction unless it's like super intentional, because then you'll just end up stretching your face really weirdly. If I put this over where it's supposed to be, and I just stretch it out like this. It's gonna do weird things. You can see how the texture itself is kind of stretched out. And we don't really want that, so you want to make sure that if you're going to scale, that you're scaling without an axis. So just scale, and don't hit X, don't hit Y, don't hit middle mouse button, just scale it uniformly. How did I unwrap that last part? So I've got one seam at the top where the material changes. I've got one seam in the middle that's acting as my horizontal or my vertical seam as if it was a cylinder. And then I've got cutting this part off so that it's separated at the top, as if I was separating the top and bottom parts of the cylinder. Kind of thinking about this as if it was one cylinder just wrapped around into a U shape. So this is as if this was one cylinder like that. When moving the UV is snapping a lot, yes, you've got snapping turned on up here, so you can just turn that off by clicking it or hitting Shift Tab. Yeah, so Shift Tab will get rid of that snapping, so you can move around free. Yeah, Jonathan, it's not going to be a perfect match to the way it was before, because I probably didn't unwrap it in the same way. Like I mentioned, like it's not, there's no cookie cutter in stone way to unwrap things. So you can see I did a bit differently here, where I didn't loop it all, I didn't seam it all the way, I just seamed it halfway. You can see here I have these extra cuts, you can see here I have extra cuts. So there's no like one way to do it. And generally, like this is just for example purposes, 9 times out of 10 you are unwrapping it first, mapping everything, and then texturing it in something like Photoshop. Or, like I know Gavin showed you texturing in Blender, and you can definitely do texturing in Blender. And yeah, there is a random vertex on the hook thing, yeah. I saw that somewhere on the UV, but it wasn't the end of the world. Yeah, there's a random one on the UV, right? Where is it? Right there. It's alright. I didn't make this model. Full disclaimer. Anyway, so if we unwrap it, now we can just move everything around. I'm going to select this island. I'm going to rotate it by negative 90 degrees. So I just hit, I don't like how it's not showing my keyboard, but hit 90 and then the negative symbol on my keyboard, and it'll lock it to 90 degrees, and I can just move it into place and scale it. And it's not quite fitting there. Put on this one, it'll fit better. And we just go around and do this for every single one of the parts. So this one, rotate 90 so that it fits. Scale it into this part here. Best you can, doesn't have to be perfect at all. And if we come across something like this, where it just won't, it won't get out of this gray space, you can just take these, you can take just the vertices and move them. It's not the end of the world if you just move them a little bit, it doesn't have to be perfect. So let's move on, next piece, I'm just going to select the island and bring it down. I'm going to do the same thing here. This just isn't working, so I'm going to mark these again. Try and move these around a little bit so that it's not on the gray space. You want to try and avoid moving things around because it does stretch the texture a little bit, but it's not the end of the world if you move around a little bit. especially not if you're like not doing AAA level graphics. Like it's usually not very noticeable. So I can move this one over here. Move this one down here. And I can move this here. Yeah, and the handle's not going to fit because, like I mentioned, I unwrapped it differently, but just get it close. Can even rotate it a bit. And then, if we come back out, you should see that are, oh, I missed one. Missed these guys. I'm just gonna shove them in like that. And this one. No, you do want to move things around. You, just like individual vertices. If you move entire islands, it's no problem. You just want to try to avoid moving individual vertices or scaling it to like this or like this. There are definitely cases where that's good, but you want to try and avoid that for the most part. And if you follow along, then you should have something that looks like the original. It might look a little bit different. I put the different model, or the different symbol on this side this time. Yeah, notice the seam I was talking about earlier here. It's very hard to see, but that's why you kind of want to avoid the seams on the edge if you can. If you haven't followed along at all, that's also fine. I just hope you kind of helped or started to get a better understanding of unwrapping here. And then the recording is also up on, sorry, it will be up on YouTube as well. So, via lost Leo. Well, I definitely have time now. Obviously, it's 3:44. We got through this pretty quickly. I can help people catch up if they're behind. And then I just got a couple more things I'm going to show you guys. Nope, nothing assigned. This is just to follow along. It's just for today's lab. It's not even a lab activity. It's just kind of how I think is a good way to teach you guys things. Just if you do it yourself, it helps. G, move on the vertex, is how you move the individual vertices, yeah. So you just have to make sure you're in vertex selection mode, which is up here. Yep, no problem. I actually just ran one seam all the way around it, just to keep it simple. Because like I said, it wasn't a detail piece or anything, so I figured it would be fine if the actual texture is not very detailed itself. Let's do that. It's just one big loop around it, and it still looks just fine. Seams on the box part? Yep. So I mentioned you mean this part. So I'm just gonna hide everything to make it a bit easier to understand, or to see. But you've got each of your block sections that are a different material sectioned out by seams here on either side. You've got that crown on top, chicken looking thing, sectioned out as well. And then you've got the bottom part sectioned out as it's going to be a different material. So anywhere there's a different material, and then for the box itself, I just ran a loop around the side into the bottom and added these loops in the UV editor, because I didn't actually know they were, so I added them like that. How to hide parts like that, yeah. So I'm using L with the seam select. And then yeah, Control I to select the opposite, and then H. Are we gonna get a tutorial about actually creating texture art? Not specifically, unless you wanted me to give you that tutorial right now. We still have an hour, 10 minutes, and you guys don't have an assignment this week, right? You're just creating diorama plans, I believe, collecting reference and applying the 7 Ps. Yep. Cool. So I don't really need to, or I guess there isn't really anything for me to go over, like review for you guys for handing in this week. So if you want to instead for me to just go about texturing something, I can do that over the next hour after I have like one more thing to show you guys. I've just got one more part about your dioramas. Jonathan, and you put your thing in the Discord. That's a good use. That's like a much better use of space. You might have a bit of trouble texturing it because you've got some places where there's a lot of seams, but you know, it might be all right. So if everybody's good with the hammer, I'll show you guys a few more things. We'll just move on to something else. Alright, I'm just gonna assume everybody's good with the hammer. And I apologize for the recording, but the chat is gonna disappear for a second. And just give me 1 second, guys. So I'm going to show you guys a few diorama examples, I suppose. Oh, let's fix that again. I'm going to show you guys a few diorama examples. Oh, what's going on? Or environment examples. So this one was Jack. I don't know if you guys know Jack. He's the president of Digital Art Club, and he's my TA. You can have a 5-minute break. I guess you don't really need to see this part per se. It's kind of just a, yeah. But if you've seen Jack's art, he's incredible. So like, yeah, he's my TA. So he's your TA's TA. So he's pretty damn good. This was his first year. We didn't have to do a diorama, but we had to do a modular environment. So this was his. But the reason I'm pulling this up is because he has really good use of texture space. So you can see all the UV unwraps he did. And let's go into, and let's get the wireframes. There we go. So you can see here that he's got all of this, all of his textures for this are set up on a single 2K map. So this is like very optimized. You can see he started with the checkered material so that he could make sure his UVs were all detailed properly. And then he's gone into Photoshop with the UVs, laid out his base colors. I guess I'll give you guys a quick run through the Photoshop process. But you can see there's like no empty space here. He's used up all of his space as well as he possibly could to just, you know, kind of maximize it. It's really good. You can see he's got like repeating elements here. So if I hover over in Sketchfab the parts of the texture, it'll show other parts of the texture where that same texture is being used. So like all of these tiles are the same, but he's made sure to make it a tileable texture so that, you know, you can't tell that it's the same. It's tileable 100% all the way, which is great. So that's one way to save texture space. with the skulls, the more organic features, like I kind of did with that shrimp, I just kind of cut it down the middle. He just cuts it down the middle here. And then he's got some seams he cut in here to stop the stretching. And he's not cut it all the way down the middle so that there's no seam down the middle of the face, because that would be quite ugly. But then the back part and the head, to make it easier, he just cut off the back part entirely. There's a seam running all the way around here. And he kind of left a bit here, but that's fine. Same thing with these knives. He's got them all laid out in the texture space here. He could have reused the space, but I guess he just wanted to make sure there's a bit of variation. But anyways, yeah, so if you find him on Sketchfab, you can take a look at his, because they're all really good examples of like how to use your texture space and all that. Do we need to UV unwrap our diorama? You definitely will, because you'll have to texture it. Yeah. Yep. So close that for now. And then, so this diorama, I'll pull it up. This is an example where each part has its own texture. So you can do it either way. It's better if this is all one texture. The caveat here was I used very low resolution textures, so these are super low res to make up for the fact. So yes, I have 4 of them, but they take up the same amount of space as one 1K map, because they're all 512 maps. So you just gotta think, set yourself like a limit. Like, actually, Gavin will probably set the limit for you. If I remember correctly, he said it for us. He said we were limited to 2K maps, I think. So he'll probably do something similar for you guys for your diorama. And it's just not, these are just 2 ways that you can use that texture space, but you want to try and fill as much of the space as you can. Drawing all the textures manually. I am not exactly sure. I don't have like final requirements for that for the final project yet. It's just sort of like the general idea. So with that, it's 3:55. If you guys want to take a break, we can take a break, come back at like 4:10 or something like that, 15 minutes. And then for the last 50 minutes, if you guys want, I will just run you through Photoshop texturing or painting like a model, like how to do that. What you guys use for GDW or the final assignment. Texturing in Blender. Possible, just not great. The tools just aren't there. I've done it. Like that stump model I just had pulled up was, I textured that entirely in Blender. So it's possible entirely, but it's just better to use Photoshop. I wouldn't say it's quite mad, and I know there are really good Blender artists out there who can use that single brush to like crazy extents. Just it takes so long to do that, and if you already have 2D painting skills, you might as well use them. So. Plus, Gavin kind of went over the 3D texturing process already, so I'll try and do something different, just in case people want to take a different approach. So yeah, with that, we'll come on back at 4:10, and I'll get started with that part, and it'll be quick. We'll just, I don't know, we'll probably just texture. We'll just texture this, since we already have the UV unwraps and everyone's already got the file. So yeah, enjoy your break. I'm gonna get some water myself, and then we'll come back in 15. pixel graphics. That's an interesting approach. If you remember Cube World, that's the last voxel game I played. Cube World was a banger if you had friends to play it with. Like, playing it by yourself, when everything just disappeared, it kind of sucked, but playing it with friends, just messing around, it was pretty good. As for dumping Photoshop last year, unfortunately not. Photoshop you will probably use on and off for the rest of this program. I mean, I guess you don't have to use Photoshop. It could be Krita or TV Paint or whatever. The new one on Steam, that's the one that I was talking about. The OG one was better, but the one on Steam was still good if you had friends to play it with. I don't actually have any Photoshop brushes myself, to be honest with you. I 90% have just used the Gavin approach of using the round brush and changing it, and occasionally the square brush. I'm by no means a Photoshop expert. Like, I use a program called Substance Painter for texturing my stuff. Try to chalk to make clouds. Yeah, there are definitely good ways to make textures easily in Photoshop with the right brushes. Circle to give them the same. Yeah, the brushes just make everything faster. But like, that's useful. But yeah, I don't actually have any brushes of my own personally. If I had to recommend brushes, what's going on? If I had to recommend brushes for Photoshop, I don't know if you've ever heard of Ahmed Al-Douri, but if you go to his Gumroad, he's got a set of Photoshop brushes that he uses, and I really like the textures in his work. And those textures, you know, like the brushes that he has are nice for it. And you can use them for environment textures as well. He just mostly does portraits. Yeah, there are also preset brushes too, a good chunk of them. Yeah, your clouds look pretty good though, Jonathan. I don't draw much these days either. How are you guys finding the online teaching going? Enjoying it? That's not the usual response. Harder to focus, yeah, that's fair. I miss people. I miss people too. I really miss people. Loved hanging out in the game lab all the time, but easier to focus. Yeah. Guess it kind of depends. Rely on coffee to get through the day. I know that feeling. It's not great. Harder to keep track of assignments for sure. Yeah, Canvas. Especially with Canvas, like just starting with Canvas this year, all of a sudden, out of nowhere, everything doesn't make sense anymore. Nobody remembers where anything is. I spent like 2 weeks just trying to find my assignments. Yeah. The dashboard like kind of works, but you can barely tell what you've already done. You don't know what you've already handed in. Like there's just a weird check mark that you have to click yourself most of the time. Yeah, I'm not a huge fan of Canvas personally. To use the calendar, yeah. The calendar is pretty good. I don't like the calendar so much on the mobile apps if you use the mobile one, but it's pretty good on the computer. Yeah, it's really hard to see the announcements. Like, on Blackboard, you get like the announcement emails right from the profs and stuff. That was really good because then I could find all my links. But it is kind of annoying having to go like search through for certain announcements. Blackboard could have used a facelift, but personally, yeah, I liked it better too. Don't you guys get emails from Canvas? I haven't gotten a single one from Canvas. I don't know. Maybe it just depends on the prof. Oh wow. Yeah, no, I haven't gotten a single one. I guess it's maybe prof dependent. Notification settings. Oh, is that how they do it? You can. Gotcha. I asked for Canvas announcements and when labs are posted or tutorial videos. So we're still kind of late as far as like the TA stuff goes. So I still don't have access to Canvas. Hopefully by the end of this week, so I can finally start getting things out to you guys, and I don't have to rely purely on Discord because I know not everybody's using Discord. Oh, I see it, Jonathan. Yeah. Okay, cool. Thanks. Yeah, that's a lot of tab. There are a lot of different things you can be notified for. I don't know why they have so many. Let's see, Discord's up to date. Are most of you guys using Photoshop or probably? Clip Studio, Krita. Yeah, it got renewed by the school for Krita. Okay, wait, do I have it installed? I should. If more are using Krita, I can use Krita as well. Although it shouldn't matter in the end, really. It's going to be more about the Blender side of the process. Do not expect anything too pretty out of me. I'm not the best 2D artist. Yeah, Gary, if you sign back in, I had to go over to, what's it called? Like the UIT web services and just reinstalled the cloud, Adobe Cloud. Yeah, my Photoshop is not from the school. I'm not sure about the text in Creative. I don't really use it personally. Actually, I think we're gonna go with Photoshop because we can try photo bashing our textures together too that way. Then I don't have to worry about drawing anything good with my mouse. Because then we can do some pretty funky stuff with our hammer. Alright. It's 4:10, so I think we're gonna start up again. Hopefully everybody's back from getting a coffee or making a snack or whatever they're doing. And let's get started here. So now that we've got our nice unwrapped hammer here, what we can do is we can actually export our UV map. So, it's here somewhere. Am I blind? There it is. Export to UV layout. So if we go to the UV tab, we can go to Export UV layout, and we can click it. And I'm just going to save this to my desktop as hammer.002png. It's going to default to our texture size, so 2048, and export. And if I go to my desktop, I now have just my UVs laid out like this in a separate image file. So I'm going to open up Photoshop. I'm just realizing it's going to show my Photoshop history. There might be a picture of a man-sized or a horse-sized duck in there somewhere. But I'm just going to move on past that. No, it's not. You know the would you rather face 100 duck-sized horses or one big duck? There it is. Just horse-sized duck. Yeah, so we went, I'm not going to open it, it doesn't even open. But I took Photoshop and went through the, did a little proof for my friend there. Just to prove him he was wrong about facing a goose-sized, or a horse-sized goose. Exactly, that's what I told him. See, not just ducks, too, a Canadian goose. Just ruthless. And the size of a horse, ridiculous. Exactly, it's not worth it. Had to prove him wrong with a little bit of math and science, you know. So, with our Photoshop document open, I sized it to 2048 by 2048 because it's the same size as our UVs. I'm just going to drag them in, and voila, I now have our UVs in Photoshop on a separate layer, which is really good because I can now add my own layer, and I can paint underneath my UVs. And this brush is just a Photoshop default brush. PNG the UVs. Over in Blender, on my UV editor, I went to UV at the top here, and there's Export UV layout. Isn't it more difficult to paint in 2D? Technically, yes, but the tools available are much better. And until we get into Substance Painter, which is going to be way later, this is a good way to texture things. So what I'm actually going to do, instead of hand painting things right now, because I'm using a mouse and I'm not the greatest at hand painting things anyway, I'm just going to go to Google So let's bring this over here. Yeah, Substance Painter takes a bit to get into it. I don't know if it's in the course curriculum exactly, I don't remember, but I'm gonna at least try to teach you guys about it because it's incredibly powerful. Between that and Designer, you can do some crazy stuff. So, let's just Google like space. Sure, Milky Way galaxy or whatever. And I'll save that to my desktop. Don't tell the FBI I didn't use a stock image. And we'll drag this in. Export as PNG, it doesn't show the white. If it just shows a white screen, you have to select. You have to select your vertices. So you have to make sure that you're not in sync mode and you have your vertices selected. And then export. And then your UV should show up. But now, back to this cosmic space thingy. So this is the texture space that this is going to take up, this front face. So if I fit this to the texture space here, kind of hard to see, but I'm going to put this like this so that it covers all of my UV space here. So that's one way to do it, is using images. For another example, I'll show you how to do it. Oh, where's my scrubby zoom? Oh, scrubby zoom got disabled on me. So do it like this. Let's say I wanted to hand paint these parts here. The easiest way to do that is to use the lasso tool. I'm going to use the polygonal lasso tool. And I'm just going to click like in a general area around my UVs and just apply a base color. So I'm just going to use the fill tool and let's fill this, I don't know, purple. Nice place to get high res textures that are free. If you know Blender Guru, he has a website. They're not free, but you can get a free trial. It is a bit tricky to get your own high-res textures, though. Like, especially ones that tile properly. You can kind of fake it sometimes, but not always. To export, it's right up here. Export UVs. Yeah, you just have to make sure that your object is selected and showing up in the viewport without sync turned on. And it should bring up a window to let you export anywhere you want. So just my desktop this time. And yeah, then you can bring it into Photoshop. Still looking for it, JJ. If you just hit UV and hit E, it also does it. If you can't find it in this giant menu, just hit E for export. But yeah, that's an easy way to block out your shape and your materials. Just use the polygonal lasso tool. Export it with a gray background. Definitely shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, it's not even an option. I'm not sure how you ended up with a gray background, if I'm honest. Unless somewhere in here, if you've somehow managed to set the alpha to none, that might be it. Should just leave it on straight. It's UV export, so it's a UV window option. So it's where the selection modes are, and just to the right. Open file and then just copied the layer. Yeah, maybe. I just drag and dropped it in and it seemed to work, so. How do I zoom out? Oh, this is terrible. Anyway, we don't really have to worry about the background color or if it's exporting with what or whatever, because we're going to disable this layer anyway when we export this, because we don't want our, if we don't get rid of these UVs from our final texture image, oh my god, then they're going to show up on the actual mesh, and we don't want that. So when we're exporting, I'm just going to export this now for the sake of exporting. So let's do this. Open file, quick export PNG, and I'll just call this texture. Oh. And I can go back to Blender now. And I'm going to go down to my material panel. I'm going to come down to the base color. And we already had that image texture in there. I left it in there by default. Yeah, JJ's got the right idea. Just throw anything you want on. Messy files. They're not that messy. My desktop's a bit of a mess right now because I've got a lot of like legal documents on there. I just need to sign and delete from my desktop. But we can open up our image. Oh, wrong image. Still does kind of what I meant, but wrong image. It is kind of pretty. That is mostly what I was hoping for. Texture.png, open her up, and you can see that I've got my blue area where I've painted the blue on, and then for the hammer itself, I've just got this galaxy thing going on. So that's just a really simple way to work with it. You can also combine the two methods. So if I wanted this like galaxy texture, but then for the rest of it, I just wanted to hand paint it, then I can always come in here. I can select this handle, for example, and then I can go into texture paint mode, and I don't know, bright blue, and start painting this on. And it'll save to the texture. So now I've got my galaxy thing going on, and I also have my cyan handle. To choose the file, you're going to want to come over here to the material panel. And it's already got the texture loaded in, because we were just using it. So I'm just going to hit the X. And then it'll bring up the option to make a new file or to open one. So that I can open and find our texture. Oh, and another interesting note is this, I think it was JJ was asking me about this. Let's say I just accidentally oh shoot, I have like all these textures that I don't want and you want to delete them. I thought the only way to do it was some weird workaround, but it looks like Blender's added an option where, because you can't just delete them from here, it won't let you. You go up to File, and then Clean Up, Purge. It'll purge any file that's not being used. You just got to make sure that you don't have extra files in there, because if you have a texture that you're just not using at the time, but you want to use it later, and you hit Purge, it'll delete it. So it's in File. File, Clean Up, Purge. And if I do that, and I come over here, you'll notice I got rid of all those extra textures that I made. So yeah, pretty quick rundown on just getting your Photoshop textures or image textures in. I can show you one more thing that's kind of, if you just need a quick object and you kind of have a texture already, I can't like super recommend this, but there's a different method of UV unwrapping that's not very good, but for something like this it might work. If I select all of this and I just position my camera like this, there's one that says, or is it project from view? So if I do that, it's just gonna give me all the vertices as if like it's matched up with my view. And that's just a quick way to quick and dirty kind of put it on an image texture. It's really not a great idea, but it works somewhere. Control E, you can remove and add seams, yeah. Well, it brings up a menu, right? You have to select the seams that you want to remove. If I bring this up now, you'll see I've kind of mapped the texture one-to-one with my view. To clear all the seams, yeah, I just select everything. I just selected everything and then hit Control E. If I just come back in here, A, Control E, clear seam. So hopefully you guys have some really weird looking hammers. I just slapped whatever you wanted on them. I guess the quick thing I should mention is, just briefly, is if your texture is sitting in this texture space, like that, try and give it a border. So leave like a little bit of space when you're using the lasso tool around the object to make sure that it doesn't bleed out, because sometimes if you're painting, it'll bleed out. You'll notice it happened up here. I was painting on the handle, but it bled out a little bit onto whatever this piece is here. I don't know where it is, but you can't even see it, but just something to keep in mind. Anyway, with that and with all your weird hammers, that's basically it for today's tutorial. So, thanks for joining me. You're welcome to stay, ask me questions. I'll just be here till 5, of course, or head on out and enjoy your evenings. So take care to everybody who's heading off. I will be here. And we'll see you next Tuesday. Blender just crashed. Yeah, it's it does that, as we learned last week with my Blender crashing like 4 times. Hopefully you saved. Where we should split the seams? Yeah, oh, that's unfortunate. Blender has a recovery feature, file recover. It just kind of doesn't work great. Unless you have autosaving turned on. If you have autosaving turned on, then go to File, Recover, Autosave. It's going to be possible to find. I have way too many files in here. But I also don't have autosaving turned on this file, I think. But you can pick up recent autosaves. It'll save like 5 variations. As for splitting the seams, Gary, there's like a couple ways to do it. By the Galaxy, sure. Do you already have the texture? Aaron. Yeah, Gary, for you. Uh, Basically, there are two ways to go about it. One is you want to make sure that your seams are kind of hidden on the model, if you can. And for like, you want to think about them as basic shapes. So think about this as just a cube because that makes it easier to unwrap than thinking about it as like an outside of this shape. How do you avoid weird geometry for hybrid shapes? Not sure exactly what you mean. Splitting the model is just a really easy way to do it. So that's what I did for that bottom piece, that bottom shrimp, just because it's the easiest way, to be honest. So if you have an image like this, you should be able to just come down here in your material panel. It's this one, looks like a little spear. And you have your textures that are loaded into Blender here. So if I pick this one, it's going to map that texture. If I pick this one, it's going to map that one. If you don't see that, then you can close this. See you later, Kimberly, no problem. But if you don't have that, then you can hit the X and it'll open up new and open, and you can just open it and it'll load it into Blender. And then you can just, like, you probably, if you still have all the UV islands, you can just move them around, or I just did this UV project thing to get this like that. So if anybody else has any questions, I can answer them. Oh yeah, go for it. I mean, honestly, like, I know there's only 15 of you here. I guess I should have mentioned this earlier, but if you ever want to ask something, you can just turn on your mic, really. I don't mind. I've got it.
Okay, so for the bottom of like the very handle, which you did in the example, why did you pull the seams from the from the inside of the at the very bottom of the hammer?
Little shrimp thing?
Yeah, yeah, at the very bottom. Why did you lay it I assume it's two objects attached to each other, right? So the bottom is actually a separate object, is
Yeah,
it?
yeah.
Okay, so it's attached. So like if it's a separate object, like did you have like a seam that goes under? Because I can't seem to see it. Like for the ring, like the bottom of the hammer,
This part?
why does it wrap like can I see the UV wrap that you like
Yeah.
the map that you have? Yeah.
It's it's all on this one,
Like
by
why
the
did
way, if you're
okay.
kind of missing
Oh,
something, but it looks like that.
oh, okay. Why does it wrap in the middle? I'm kind of confused. Wait, so the seams are the parts where you cut it, right?
Yeah, all the red.
Okay, so if you cut it that way, wouldn't it split like in the sides? Like I mean like if you so you basically separated the bottom ring from the top part, right? From what you cut here?
You mean this part?
Yeah, yeah, that one
Yeah,
and the ring.
this part's a totally separate mesh, so this I didn't have to worry about
Okay.
this at all. So I can just
Okay.
hide this.
And like for the ring, like the ring thing,
Yep.
here you basically separated you cut the entire top, right?
Yeah.
But after doing that, why was it necessary to do like a second cut in like
On the inside?
like yeah. Actually wait,
Well, if you
the
don't,
cut like
this one?
oh wait, no. I think I got it wrong. I'm saying like oh you only did it for one side. Okay, I get it. Wait, if you turn it around on the back, Oh, you also cut it,
Yeah,
right?
it
So
goes all the way up around here. So, like I was saying, I'm trying to imagine this to keep it simple as one cylinder that goes all the way around. And if it was one cylinder, then one of these sides would be the top, one of these sides would be the bottom. And I don't want the top and bottom touching each other, so I've got a seam going all the way around so that they're not touching. If I remove this
if that's
seam,
the if that's the
then
case, why doesn't it like fold like like a spider like thing? Why is it a square? Because if you cut it from like the top like and then you spread it out, wouldn't it be like more of a
mm, well, it's gonna go flat. So like
okay.
if I had my
Also,
default cylinder, I have this flat part here around, and it's just flat. So that's kind of what this face is gonna be in. It's just that flat part. So it's trying to stay as flat as it possibly can, and that's why it's coming out like this.
okay, but there should be holes in the middle, right? Like when you cut it. I mean the it doesn't show, right? But when you split it flat, wouldn't there be a like a hole
Nope.
in like
You can see here if I use the L select, it's selecting everything. So there's nowhere on this part where the seams totally cut one part off from another part. So
okay.
I have this
I guess I just have bad sense of geometry then. Also another question is when you're unwrapping, do you usually like when you do something like this, when you fragment all the shape into multiple pieces, right? Is it better to like unwrap every small piece by itself? And like for example, if you cut this part of the handle, like if you have like a bigger object,
mm,
would you just like select the whole thing like or and just unwrap everything at once? Or would you like manually select a small part to unwrap?
it depends. I would say like if I was just gonna unwrap this right now, I would probably do it all at once because I kind of can just visualize what's gonna happen because I've done it so much, right? But that just comes with time. But to keep it simple is why I was kind of unwrapping it one part by one part because it's just easier to focus on one individual part at a time. Also, by doing one part when you unwrap it, like if I unwrap just this part, I'm not disrupting the rest of my unwrap. Like you can see I made this change here to match that up with the square shape. If I unwrap everything, I've moved everything. I'll have to move everything back every time I unwrap. So if I just want to make a change to this part, then it doesn't make sense to unwrap everything. I just want to unwrap this one part. And
Okay.
then I,
Oh, so once you if you only you wanted to edit and unwrap, but you only wanted to edit like one small part of it, you could manually select that specific part and just unwrap it again. Right? Is that what you're saying?
yeah.
Okay, so okay. And also there's another thing, like when you're what's it called? When you're like unwrapping, how do you like do the thing where you detach like a part so fast? Or did you already pre-detach it in this case?
What do you mean? Like when
Like
I,
okay, you know where yeah, you detach the ring like at the bottom. Like, is there
oh,
like a hotkey that lets you immediately detach the
like
closed off seams?
this. What's it
Yeah,
called?
like, or was it already detached? It was already detached, right?
This was already detached on the model, if that's what you mean.
Yeah, no, but like the ring, like the one at the top. Yeah, this part.
Let
Yeah,
me do it
was
now.
it? Oh,
It's still the same mesh.
like
I haven't actually separated it. Like this is still all
oh,
attached.
so you just you hit everything else,
Yeah,
right?
I just hit everything else.
Okay, but like, and this is there like a way to detach like to make it so that it cuts off from the main shape from the seams? Like
Yeah,
just temporarily detach it?
well, it wouldn't really be temporary, but if you use the L that I was talking about, so L for linked, and then you go to seam, you can hit P and separate selection. So now this is a separate object entirely. Uh,
Wait, how did you get them in? You press L, right? You press L and then
L,
S.
L, and then you have to click on it. So to come down here.
So okay, so first you select everything part of the ring, right? And then after that you click on L while you have all the faces selected. Is that it?
Well, I'm using L is what selects the faces. Like my screencast keys isn't working for some reason. Oh, now it's working. Look at that. It's so
Oh,
weird.
okay, okay.
But if I
So
hit
it
L,
selects
right?
everything.
As you can see, I'm hitting
So it
L.
selects everything part of that unwrapping, right? And then after that you can press
It
select
selects
link.
Yeah, it selects linked, so it selects everything, but you can come down here and limit it to just seams.
And then how did you detach it from the thing?
To detach it, I hit P. You really don't need to do that part
Oh,
though,
okay. You don't need. Oh, okay.
because
So
what I
P is
was
just hotkey.
for separating, yeah. What I was doing here is hitting Control I, and that selects everything else, and then hitting H to just hide it. So Control I is what inverts selection.
Okay, okay. I get it now. Okay, I think I
So
missed something.
Control IH.
Anyways, yeah, I don't have any other questions.
Cool.
I'll just mute myself again.
Uh, yep. So, anybody else have any questions? Or? Gary, I did it by seam. For the project thing, like I really wouldn't recommend this. I only used it like twice for my models last year as a joke. Um, but you come in here, you select everything. So I'm just gonna hit normal, so it selects everything. And then I'm gonna hit U, same as usual. But instead of just unwrapping it, I'm gonna come down to project from view. And that means that whatever orientation I have here, it will project it in 2D space to that orientation. So if I come to like this view and do it, it'll be flat. It'll match the view. You can see there's a lot of stretching here though now, because all these are overlapping on the UV space. All these here. So, I mean, you really shouldn't be using that unless you kind of need something done really quick and dirty. Yep, no problem. Oh, when I press P, I separate by selection, because after you press L, you should have that part selected. It's kind of broken. Are you hitting project from view? Yeah, whoa, what is going on with that? None of mine do that. That's kind of weird. Got some very interesting textures going on there, JJ. Yeah, I don't know why our project from view is being so broken. It's kind of just a broken thing in and of itself. So, not the end of the world. You should be unwrapping them, properly. Really. So, I think it was ortho. Uh, yeah, so that's kind of the unfortunate part. I guess it's not the slowest thing in the world, but if I was to go into Photoshop here and I want to make some changes, like I want to, I don't know, add this here for whatever reason, I'd have to export it again, save it over top of my original. Where is it? Replace my original, go back to Blender, and as I'm hovering over this window, I want to hit Alt R. Alt R refreshes images. And if I wanted to keep those changes I made, like the cyan that I was painting, I'd have to export this, open it in Photoshop, make my changes, save it, Alt R. It's kind of strange. Uh, kind of takes a little bit of time. But it's not too bad. Set what to the image? In the editor? Or over here? See, JJ. Under the navigation. On the right side. Like here? This stuff doesn't really do anything, if I'm honest. The images are up here, at the top. And if I hit the X, then I can open. If that's what you mean. Alright, perfect. Anybody else? If there's no more questions, then I'll probably just end the tutorial here. I'll save the recording and upload it to YouTube for you guys. And I'll stop the link in the Discord. And we'll see you next Tuesday. So, everybody good with that? Alright, cool. So I'm gonna end the recording.